Nobody moved. Not the waiters, not the guests, not even the groom, because lying on the crystal table was a check worth $5 million. The woman who placed it there wasn't a stranger. She was Nora's mother-in-law. Her voice was calm, cold, almost effortless. "Take the money and disappear before midnight." Every guest turned toward Nora. Some smiled. Others quietly reached for their phones. Nobody defended her. Nora searched the room, not for sympathy, not for mercy, only for one person, her husband. Ethan was standing only a few feet away, close enough to stop it, close enough to save her. But instead of speaking, he lowered his eyes. That silence hurt more than every insult. Then, his mother stepped closer. Her smile never reached her eyes. She leaned in so only Nora could hear, and whispered, "You think carrying his child makes you family?" Nora's heartbeat stopped, not because of the insult, but because only two people knew about the baby, her doctor and herself. So who betrayed her? Questions raced through her mind. Had someone followed her? Was her phone being watched? Or had someone paid to know her secret? Then, Vanessa picked up another document. This one wasn't a check. It was divorce papers, already signed by Ethan. Nora stared at his signature over and over again, praying it wasn't real. Slowly, she lifted her eyes toward Ethan. She wasn't looking for an explanation anymore. She was looking for one reason, not to hate him. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them spoke. The ballroom was so silent. Even the sound of Nora's shaky breathing seemed too loud. Then, Ethan finally looked at her. For one brief second, it felt like he was about to say everything she needed to hear. Instead, he whispered only two words. "I'm sorry." Not, "I choose you." Not, "Stay." Just, "I'm sorry." That was the moment she realized. She wasn't losing her marriage. She had already lost it, long before tonight. Without another word, she reached for the pen. Every guest leaned forward, waiting. Not because they cared about Nora, but because they wanted to witness her breaking point. Just before the pen touched the paper, a voice echoed across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's something you all deserve to know." Every head turned toward the ballroom entrance. No one recognized the man, yet he walked with the confidence of someone who didn't need permission to be there. The music stopped. Even the photographers lowered their cameras, because the woman who had just humiliated Nora had suddenly gone pale. For the first time that night, fear appeared in Vanessa's eyes. Not anger, not pride, fear. The old man looked around the ballroom. Then, his eyes stopped on Nora. His expression softened, as if he already knew her. Without saying a word, he walked straight past Ethan, past Vanessa, past every billionaire in the room, until he stood in front of Nora. Then, he asked a question that left the entire ballroom speechless. "Young lady, have we met before?" Nora searched his face. She wanted to say yes, but she had never seen him before in her life. She slowly shook her head. The old man smiled, not because she remembered, but because she hadn't changed. Then he looked down. His eyes rested on the divorce papers. The smile disappeared. His voice became calm, but every word carried authority. "Who asked this woman to sign those papers?" No one answered, not a single person. Finally, Vanessa stepped forward. "I did." She spoke with confidence, but her voice wasn't as steady as before. The old man nodded once. Then he asked a question that drained every ounce of color from Vanessa's face. "Since when does the Sinclair family decide who deserves dignity?" Silence. Complete silence. Even Ethan couldn't look up. No one dared to speak. The ballroom, once filled with laughter and celebration, had become eerily silent. Every guest stood frozen, waiting to see who would challenge the old man. But no one moved. Not the executives, not the family friends, not even Ethan. The old man slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the crystal table beside the unsigned divorce papers. His eyes swept across the room, studying every face. Then they settled on Nora once more. There was no pity in his expression, only respect. For the first time that night, someone looked at her not as an outsider, but as a human being. The old man took a slow breath. I've spent 40 years building businesses. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals. I've met presidents, kings, and people who believed money gave them the right to decide another person's worth. He looked directly at Vanessa, and every single one of them eventually learned the same lesson. You can inherit wealth, you can inherit power, but you can never inherit character. The words landed harder than any shout ever could. Around the ballroom, guests avoided looking at Vanessa. Some lowered their heads. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. The woman who had controlled the room only minutes ago now stood completely alone. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. For years, she had controlled every conversation with money, status, and intimidation. Tonight, none of it worked. The old man slowly turned away from her and faced the guests instead. I've attended hundreds of weddings. I've watched families celebrate new beginnings. But never have I witnessed a family destroy its own future before the vows were even complete. His voice echoed through the ballroom. Every guest felt the weight of those words. Some looked down in embarrassment. Others quietly stepped away from the Sinclair family, unwilling to be associated with the humiliation unfolding before them. For the first time in her life, Vanessa realized that reputation could disappear in a single night. The old man finally walked toward Nora. He stopped only inches away. His voice softened. I don't know your name. I don't know your story. But I know this. No woman deserves to be treated the way you've been treated tonight. Nora felt something she hadn't felt since entering the ballroom. Not relief. Not victory. Respect. It was the first genuine kindness anyone had shown her that entire evening. A tear rolled quietly down her cheek. Not because she was weak, but because someone had finally reminded her she still had value. The ballroom remained silent. Even the photographers forgot to take pictures. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Without another word, Nora looked down at the divorce papers one last time. The ink hadn't touched the page, and now it never would. She quietly placed the pen back on the crystal table, not out of defiance, not out of hope, but because she finally understood something. No signature could end a marriage that had already died. She slowly removed her wedding ring. The diamond caught the glow of the chandeliers one final time. Then she placed it beside the unsigned papers. No dramatic speech, no tears, no begging, just silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than revenge. She turned toward the massive ballroom doors and began to walk away. No one stopped her. Not Ethan, not Vanessa, not a single guest. Outside, the night felt different. Rain poured from the sky, as though the world itself had been waiting for this moment. Nora stepped into the storm without an umbrella. The expensive wedding dress that had once symbolized a new beginning quickly became soaked by the cold rain. Each step carried her farther away from the Sinclair mansion and closer to a future she could never have imagined. Behind her, the grand doors slowly closed. The music faded, the lights disappeared, and with them, the life she had spent years trying to protect. She paused only once, resting a trembling hand on her stomach. A tiny heartbeat still depended on her. No matter what happened next, she wasn't walking alone. She took a deep breath, lifted her head, and disappeared into the rain. The rain refused to stop. Each step grew heavier as Nora pulled the small suitcase behind her. The wedding dress clung to her skin. Her shoes sank into puddles that reflected flashes of lightning across the empty road. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't go back. Every memory of the Sinclair mansion replayed in her mind. Every insult, every silent betrayal, every moment Ethan had chosen comfort over courage. She wiped the tears from her face, but the rain hid them anyway. Then she stopped. Placing both hands gently over her stomach, she whispered through trembling lips, I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I promise you one thing. You'll never have to beg anyone to love you. The promise wasn't made to herself. It was made to the tiny life growing inside her. For the first time that night, she found a reason to keep walking. Minutes later, the road became quieter. No houses, no lights, only the sound of rain and distant thunder. Then, a pair of headlights appeared through the storm. A black luxury sedan sped toward a sharp bend in the road. Too fast. Far too fast. The tires suddenly lost their grip on the rain-slick pavement. The driver fought desperately to regain control. But it was already too late. The vehicle spun violently across the road. Metal screamed against the guardrail. Glass exploded into the darkness. And with one deafening impact, everything went silent. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Nora froze. The sound of twisting metal faded into the rain. For several seconds, she couldn't move. Her heart pounded against her chest. Every instinct told her to keep walking. She had already lost everything tonight. She wasn't strong enough for another tragedy. Then, a faint cry escaped from inside the wrecked car. Not loud, not desperate. Just enough to remind her someone was still alive. Nora looked down at her soaked wedding dress, then at the suitcase beside her. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, the frightened bride was gone. Only courage remained. Leaving her suitcase in the middle of the road, she ran toward the wreckage. The driver's door refused to open. She pulled again. Nothing. She searched through the shattered side window. An elderly man was trapped inside. Blood ran down the side of his face. His breathing was shallow. His eyes were barely open. Rain mixed with broken glass as Nora reached through the damaged window. Ignoring the sharp edges cutting into her hands, she searched for the seatbelt release. Her fingers finally found it. Click. The belt released. The man collapsed forward. Nora caught him before his head struck the steering wheel. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his wealth. She didn't know that the decision she was making would change the rest of her life forever. The rain fell harder. Nora wrapped one arm around the injured man and slowly guided him away from the wrecked car. Every step was a struggle. His weight threatened to pull them both to the ground. Her soaked wedding dress clung to her legs. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but she refused to let go. Halfway to the roadside, the man stirred, his eyes open for only a second. He looked at Nora through blurred vision, confused, weak, barely conscious. His lips moved, almost too softly to hear. Why? Nora didn't stop walking. She tightened her grip and answered with quiet certainty. Because leaving you here would make me no different from the people who left me behind. The old man closed his eyes again, not from fear, but because, for the first time that night, he knew he wasn't alone. Then, bright headlights pierced through the storm. One vehicle, then another, and another. Within seconds, a convoy of black SUVs raced onto the highway. Brakes screeched. Doors flew open. Men in dark suits rushed into the rain. Some carried medical kits. Others scanned the area with disciplined precision. One woman stepped out from the lead vehicle. Elegant, composed, powerful. She ignored everyone else. Her eyes searched the road until they found the injured man. The color drained from her face. She whispered only one word. Father. Everything changed. Within seconds, the quiet highway became a scene of organized chaos. Paramedics rushed toward the injured man. Security officers formed a protective circle. The elegant woman reached her father just as the medical team lifted him onto a stretcher. Her hands trembled. She had never seen him this vulnerable. One of the doctors quickly examined him. His pulse was weak, but steady. He'll make it, the doctor said. Relief washed over her face. Only then did she notice the woman standing a few feet away. A bride, soaked by the rain, covered in mud. Her hands were bleeding from shattered glass. She looked exhausted. Yet she hadn't asked for anything. Not money, not recognition, not even her own injuries to be treated. The elegant woman stared at Nora for a long moment, then quietly asked, "Was it you who saved him?" Nora simply nodded. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The rain continued to fall between them. The elegant stranger stepped closer. She gently took Nora's injured hands into hers. The small cuts from the broken glass were still bleeding. "You did this, for a man you didn't even know." Nora looked toward the ambulance. "I couldn't leave him there." The woman lowered her head. In her world, people helped because they expected something in return. Contracts, money, influence. But this young woman had expected nothing. For the first time in many years, she met someone who reminded her what kindness looked like. She smiled through tears. "My name is Victoria, and the man whose life you saved is my father." Victoria looked at Nora for several long seconds. Rainwater ran down both of their faces. Neither woman seemed to notice anymore. "You should be in a hospital," Victoria said softly as she looked at Nora's bleeding hands. Only then did she notice the torn wedding gown, the missing wedding ring, the suitcase abandoned in the rain. Something wasn't right. "You weren't on this road by accident," Victoria whispered. Nora forced a small smile. "I lost my home tonight." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Victoria glanced toward the dark highway behind Nora. There was no one looking for her. No husband, no family, no friends. Only silence. For the first time, Victoria saw not a stranger, but a woman who had been left with nothing. Victoria took a slow breath. "My father built our family with one belief." She looked directly into Nora's eyes. "A person who risks everything to save another life should never have to face the world alone." She removed her coat. Without hesitation, she gently wrapped it around Nora's trembling shoulders. The warmth surprised her, not because of the fabric, but because it had been so long since anyone had treated her with kindness. Victoria reached into her handbag and handed Nora a simple business card. No flashy logo, no long title, only one name, Victoria Harrington. Below it, one address. "Come and see me when you're ready." Nora accepted the card. She had no idea. She was holding the key to an entirely different future. The rain continued to fall, but for the first time that night, it no longer felt cold. The ambulance doors closed. The convoy disappeared into the night. For a few moments, Nora remained standing alone in the rain. Victoria's business card rested tightly in her hand. She stared at it. One small piece of paper, yet somehow it felt heavier than the suitcase beside her. It wasn't a promise of money. It wasn't an offer of charity. It was something she hadn't received in years. A choice. Slowly, she picked up her suitcase. She looked once more at the empty highway behind her. There was nothing waiting for her there anymore. No home, no marriage, no future she recognized. Taking a deep breath, she turned and followed the ambulance lights disappearing into the distance. For the first time that night, she wasn't running away from her past. She was walking toward her future. Several hours later, the storm had finally passed. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows of one of the city's most prestigious private hospitals. Nora sat quietly outside the intensive care unit, still wearing the same wedding dress, still exhausted, still wondering whether she should leave. People walked past without knowing her story. To them, she was simply a young woman waiting for news. A nurse approached with a warm smile. "Miss, someone is asking for you." Confused, Nora stood. The nurse led her through a quiet hallway, past private recovery rooms, past armed security officers, until they stopped outside a large suite. The door slowly opened. Inside, Victoria was waiting. She wasn't alone. Several of the city's most influential business leaders stood inside the room, and every one of them turned to look at Nora. Nora hesitated at the doorway. Everyone inside the room was dressed in tailored suits. Successful, powerful, confident. She looked down at herself. Her wedding dress was stained with mud. The lace was torn. Her hands were wrapped in fresh bandages. For a brief moment, she considered walking away. She didn't belong in a room like this. Before she could turn, Victoria smiled. "Please, come in." Nora stepped inside. The room fell completely silent. The elderly man she had rescued was now awake. His face was pale, but his eyes were full of life. He looked directly at Nora. Without saying a word, he slowly tried to sit upright. The doctors moved to stop him. Victoria did too, but he gently raised one hand. "No, I owe this young woman my life." Ignoring every protest, the old man slowly swung his legs over the side of the hospital bed. Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the room, he stood, not because he was strong, but because respect demanded it. For several seconds, no one breathed. Then the most powerful businessman in the country bowed his head to Nora. "Thank you. You saved more than my life tonight. You saved my family." The room remained silent. One by one, the executives followed his example. Each lowered their head. Not because Nora was wealthy, not because she held power, but because courage deserves respect. The old man smiled. My name is Richard Harrington. I built companies. I built fortunes. But tonight, I almost lost everything that truly mattered. His voice became softer. I've spent my entire life trying to recognize good people, and in 30 years, I've met very few. He looked directly into Nora's eyes. You are one of them. Nora couldn't speak. No one had ever looked at her that way before. Not Ethan. Not Vanessa. Not even her own family. Richard continued. I heard enough from Victoria to know you have nowhere to go. He paused, then said the words that would change her life forever. My home is open to you, for as long as you need it. My home has many rooms, but very few people I truly trust. He looked directly at Nora. I want you to stay with us. Not as someone we rescued, but as someone who rescued us. Nora stood frozen. No one had ever offered her a home before, not without expecting something in return. Nora lowered her eyes. I don't have anything to give you. Richard smiled. I didn't ask for anything. You've already given my family more than money could ever buy. Victoria stepped forward. Just let us help. For the first time that night, Nora allowed herself to believe that kindness could be real. 3 days later, Nora arrived at the Harrington estate. Massive iron gates slowly opened. Beyond them stood one of the most breathtaking homes she had ever seen. But it wasn't the mansion that captured her attention. It was the people waiting outside. The staff lined the entrance, not to inspect her, not to judge her, but to welcome her. For the first time in years, she walked into a home. Without fear, the Harrington estate was unlike anything Nora had ever known. No one looked down on her. No one whispered behind her back. Every smile felt genuine. Every act of kindness felt unfamiliar. That first night, she stood alone on the balcony, looking over the endless gardens. For the first time in years, she slept without fear. The next morning, Richard invited Nora to breakfast. He spoke very little. Instead, he watched. The way she thanked every servant, the way she refused to waste food, the quiet dignity she carried, despite everything she had lost. Richard smiled. Character could never be bought. A few days later, Richard noticed Nora suddenly lose her balance. Victoria rushed to support her. The family doctor arrived within minutes. After a quiet examination, the doctor smiled gently. Congratulations. She's going to be a mother. The room fell silent. Richard looked at Nora, not with disappointment, but with compassion. Nora lowered her head. I was going to tell my husband, her voice broke, but he never gave me the chance. Richard slowly walked toward her. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then this child will grow up knowing exactly what love looks like. For the first time, Nora cried. Not from heartbreak, but from relief. Days turned into weeks. Instead of treating Nora like a guest, Richard treated her like a student. Every morning, he invited her into his private study, not to talk about the past, but to prepare her for the future. The world doesn't reward the strongest people, Nora. It rewards the ones who never stop learning. For the first time, she believed she could become more than her pain. Soon, the lessons moved beyond books. Richard took Nora to board meetings, business negotiations, charity foundations, investment conferences. At first, she simply observed, listening more than speaking, learning how powerful people made impossible decisions without ever raising their voices. Months passed. One afternoon, Richard surprised everyone. He asked Nora to present her own solution to a difficult business problem. The room became silent. Executives exchanged uncertain glances. She took a deep breath, then spoke, not with fear, but with confidence. When she finished, no one applauded. They simply nodded, because they knew a leader had just been born. The months became years. Each lesson shaped Nora into someone stronger. She learned to negotiate without fear, to lead without arrogance, to listen before speaking. Richard wasn't building another executive. He was building a legacy. Then, the day she had been waiting for arrived. A tiny cry filled the delivery room. Nora held her newborn child against her chest. Tears streamed down her face. Not because life had been easy, but because she finally understood some endings are only the beginning of something greater. Richard stood quietly outside the room, smiling like a proud father. Time moved quietly. Birthdays passed. Business victories followed. Her child grew, laughing through the halls of the Harrington estate. Richard grew older. His steps became slower. But every time he looked at Nora, he smiled, because he knew she was ready. 7 years. 7 years of healing. 7 years of learning. 7 years of becoming the woman they said she could never be. Then, one morning, an invitation arrived. The annual Sinclair Global Charity Gala, hosted by the very family Dodd that once told her to disappear. Nora looked at the invitation, closed it, then smiled. It is time. End of part 1. That evening, the Sinclair Global Charity Gala glittered beneath thousands of crystal lights. The city's most influential families filled the ballroom. Business leaders, celebrities, politicians, and at the center of it all, Ethan Sinclair, standing proudly beside his wife, Vanessa. They smiled for cameras, completely unaware that the woman they had destroyed had just arrived outside. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom stopped beneath the grand entrance. The chauffeur stepped out first, then opened the rear door. A pair of elegant heels touched the red carpet. The conversations inside the ballroom slowly faded. Heads turned. One by one, everyone looked toward the entrance. Nora stepped from the car. She wore an elegant ivory evening gown. Diamond earrings shimmered beneath the lights. Confidence replaced every trace of fear. At her side walked a smiling 7-year-old daughter. Behind them, Richard Harrington, Victoria, and members of the Harrington family. The whispers began immediately. That's Nora Harrington, the executive director of Harrington Global Holdings. No, it can't be. Inside the ballroom, Ethan turned toward the entrance. His smile disappeared. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered across the marble floor. Vanessa slowly followed his gaze. Her face turned pale. Neither of them spoke, because standing before them was the woman they had abandoned. Only now, she looked like someone the entire world respected. The ballroom fell silent. Ethan stared at Nora as if he'd seen a ghost. His lips parted. Nora? It was the first time he had spoken her name in 7 years. Nora stopped a few feet away. Her expression remained calm. No anger, no tears, no bitterness, only quiet confidence. Ethan slowly stepped forward. I thought... His voice failed him. He searched for the right words, but none came. Nora gave a small, polite smile. You thought my story had ended. She glanced around the ballroom. It didn't. It simply began somewhere else. The silence grew even heavier. Vanessa finally spoke. So, this is all some kind of performance? Nora turned toward her. No. It's called surviving, and learning that your worth was never decided by people who failed to see it. Several guests quietly nodded. The room had begun to shift, not toward wealth, toward respect. Richard Harrington slowly walked forward. His presence commanded immediate respect. He stood beside Nora, then looked directly at Ethan. 7 years ago, you threw away the greatest gift life ever placed in your hands. He rested a fatherly hand on Nora's shoulder. We didn't. The ballroom erupted into applause, not because someone had won, but because everyone had witnessed the triumph of character. The applause slowly faded. Ethan lowered his eyes. For the first time in his life, he understood what he had truly lost. Not wealth, not status, but the woman who had loved him before he had anything. He took a slow step toward Nora. I'm sorry. The words came 7 years too late. Nora looked into Ethan's eyes. There was no anger left, only peace. She smiled gently. I forgave you a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean going backward. She reached for her daughter's hand. My future is already here. Vanessa quietly lowered her head. For years, she believed winning meant taking someone else's place. Tonight, she realized real victory could never be stolen. It had to be earned. Without a word, she walked away. Richard smiled, then addressed the guests. Success isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by the lives you change. The ballroom erupted into applause once again. Not for a billionaire, not for a company, but for a woman who refused to let betrayal define her destiny. Later that night, Nora stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. Her daughter slipped her small hand into hers. "Mom, were you ever scared?" Nora smiled. "Every single day. But courage is choosing to keep walking anyway." They watched the city lights together, no longer haunted by the past, only inspired by tomorrow. Life has a way of testing us, sometimes through betrayal, sometimes through heartbreak, but every ending carries the possibility of a new beginning. The people who underestimate you do not decide your future. You do. If Nora's journey reminded you that resilience is stronger than rejection, share this story with someone who needs hope today. And remember, your greatest comeback may still be ahead of you.